You're throwing around a lot of misnomers. If communism is such a functional system, why is every single communist regime on the planet risen up and started mass political purges, genocides, or support unscientific ideas? They get obliterated.
In almost every developed country on Earth, bourgeoisie is the majority.
Sorry, this is the delusional statement. Marxism, Leninism, at the end of the day.
This guy was around for Lenin. This guy influenced Lenin too.
You might as well get rid of the companies and just get the government to step in directly.
No, I disagree with that.
Hello and welcome to Platinum Politics. I'm your host Maze, and today we have a very, very classic debate: capitalism versus socialism. Now in this debate we have 4 participants, and it's not split as evenly as you would think. That should be interesting, right? But without further ado, everybody, it's debate night. To start this out, I think we're just going to do 5 minutes per person to give what your position is, and then we'll give about 4 or 5 minutes for a rebuttal. I think we'll do 4 minutes. We'll do 4 minutes. 4 minutes for each, and then I'll open up the floor, and we'll just have an open discussion, and I'll moderate as needed. Sound good to everybody? All right.
Yep.
All right, so I think we'll start with Water. I know he's been waiting for this debate more than anybody, so you have the floor.
Yeah, so I think I'm speaking for both me and Polonium when I say that capitalism is probably the best system of governance or organization, period, in the world as we have it. We would argue that the system creates the most opportunity, the greatest amount of equality, and allows for the most freedoms amongst the members who partake in the system, right? So, yeah, I'm not one for very long opening remarks, so that's going to be mine.
All right, Polonium, would you like to add to that at all?
So personally, I believe that capitalism drives innovation, creates economic flexibility, represents the people's interests, and when executed correctly and non-immorally, it pushes for civil rights among people. That's my main point.
Okay, and contrary to that, we'll get the gamer's opinion.
Okay, well, I will say that on a simple basis, saying that capitalism is the best system ever, it's kind of naive, especially considering history. That's basically what everyone said when their system was in practice. Slavery system like compared to, I don't know, a Roman noble, but it was kind of wrong. Or even feudalism. You ask a king, feudalism is the best fucking system ever. So I wouldn't throw around statements like that. I'm not even saying communism is the best system ever. I'm saying that socialism and then communism are the best systems currently available. Because in fact, I don't want to fall in your same fallacy of not believing that something else will come after that. And I wouldn't really say that capitalism really drives rights, especially for the workers. Because if you really think about it, I don't know, shorter work weeks, less working hours, better wages weren't really achieved with peace and love. The workers had to strike, to riot. Giving concession to the workers. It's not out of good art from the ruling class. It's out of necessity to keep them in check. You give small concessions, so they just shut the fuck up. So, I don't know about that.
Okay, so can I rebuttal?
We'll get Mythic's center position, and then we'll go on to the rebuttals, and we'll start with you guys.
All right. Well, the way I see it is that a system of economics and economic planning should serve the nation and its populace, not the other way around. And capitalism has problems, just as socialism does. But when you bash some things from socialism into capitalism, it works a lot better. Because at the end of the day, it should work for the greater good of the nation, not the greater good of a few essentially all but name oligarchs. There should be a safety net for those that get fucked over. There should be a safety net for those that, simply put, are unable to get a job or any other number of things. And in case of any other number of catastrophe, such as warfare, economic crisis, there should be the powers and measures in place for a government to ensure that the necessary measures under any and all circumstances are the taken ones, as opposed to leaving it up to corporate entities to handle and balance economic sphere. There should be regulation of a pretty significant margin. The priority is for the system to provide for both the population and the nation. Everything else is just a bonus. That's all I got.
All right, Polonium, Water, either one of y'all, you can start with your
I had a rebuttal to this, to what Gamer said. So when I mentioned that capitalism pushes for rights, I never said workers' rights specifically. I said civil rights. And in many cases, we can see companies, for example, let's talk about BlackRock. I'm not a big fan of them. I don't like all what they do. But one thing that you can see they did is they pushed for something called the ESG score, which is an environmental, social, and I forgot what the G stands for. But pretty much it gives companies and corporations certain points for being friendly to minorities and including people, which I think is an extremely positive thing if we were to just implement that correctly into corporate systems. That's pretty much my claim. And on the point of, you said here, socialism and communism are the best systems available since they do not, they're not like, you're not claiming there's a best, you're saying that's the best systems available. So your claim is different from on God's. Capitalism does not drive rates. It only gives short work weeks and token concessions that are given to bait people into the workforce. So I disagree with that. I think that in general, if you were to generalize, yes. But if you were to look under model or standard practices for good and optimized workforces and workplaces, we can look at Costco as a great example. They give fantastic benefits. They're unionized and they give above average salaries for their employees. So employees are, fulfilled in their own work. That's my point.
And Water, would you have anything to add on to that?
No, that was pretty well said. I don't think I need to add anything to that.
All right. Next up, I'll go ahead and give the gamer time to rebut, and then I'll have Spider after that put his 2 cents in.
Okay, well, first thing first, I will start with the BlackRock stuff. So basically, I would say that, that's pretty not bad, yes. It's not the worst thing ever, but I will argue that you shouldn't need, bonuses or quotas to maintain. Like in Italy, we have a very arguably bad thing that is called the pin quote. So basically, in a lot of places, it's expected to have a quote of women for every man that you have employed. And I think that's kind of stupid because it's arbitrary. Like, I think we should arrive to a point where you don't have to force diversity on the workplace. People get hired only based on their skills and capabilities, and that's basically it. Like, it shouldn't be left to something arbitrary or that benefits the company, because if it benefits the company is just following its interests. It's not really pursuing the emancipation of women or simply diversity in the workspace. And also, secondly, we can all agree that treating workers well works, and also more working hours don't mean more productivity, and that's simply proven by every single fact and study that has shown. That has tried that. Like in multiple countries, they've tried shorter work weeks. I think 4 days per week, and it worked. So yes. But returning to my previous point, that still falls under the umbrella of concessions. My main point is that, let's say that the whole cake, it's all the wealth accumulated in the hands of the few ones that are actually benefiting from this capitalist system. The concessions are just crumbs, very thin slices at best, sometimes, where something big happens. October Revolution. And so, as I was saying, my point is that everything that we have said, even if it's good and it sounds good, I'm not an accelerationist. I support even a small concession given by the ruling class to the workers. So basically, everything is a win, in my opinion, but still, it's very important, in my opinion, to not lose your focus and focus on the end goal, which, in my opinion, it's the entire cake, because you cannot stop at the crumbs, as I've said.
All right, now Spider, you can give us your opinion on both of these, where you stand, what you agree with, what you don't.
I'll start with the capitalists. So there's certainly merit to the idea of the Costco thing is a great example, but for every Costco there's a Walmart. For every Costco there's really any other number of varying, fucking Christ, AutoZone. One company doing good doesn't quite outweigh the 33 next to it doing anything but, especially when it comes to workplace benefits. And then you add on the fact that, you want to talk about common interest here, plenty of companies provided tens of millions to hundreds of millions to strictly try and enforce segregation for only a few decades, but they did nonetheless. And furthermore, onto the communist point, this might seem contradictory, but it is something to note. For a lot of companies, especially in smaller and medium-sized countries, it is often in their best interests to not try and fuck everything up. Doesn't mean they always will, but during the Great War, most arms manufacturer companies in France provided equipment to the French military for free or for drastically decreased rates. They are capable, and tend to be, in cases of outright emergency, more than willing of not playing those games. They will accept losses and profits for long-term gain, for both their country and themselves, obviously. They are driven by profit, but, you need a country to be in for profit to be a priority anymore.
All right. The floor is open.
Okay, so I had a few questions. So when I was mentioning the Costco thing, Mythic, I was specifically talking about how we should use that as a model example for moving forward. It's shown empirically in data that Costco is doing better than almost every other brand, profit-wise, treating their workers-wise, and all that. So I think Costco should be a method that we should push forward. The Costco model of business should be a model of business that we should push forward. And that most of the issues that people complain about lower worker wages and lower workers' rights, are more, in my opinion, of an issue of organization and the structure of the system and the way government enforces laws than it is an inherent issue of capitalism, because we see the same problems in Soviet corporations or Soviet, not Soviet corporations, but Soviet state-mandated companies and other companies in communist nations doing the same thing where they treat their workers like shit. So it's not something that's universal to capitalism thing. It's more of an issue of inherently pushing for better organizational structures in business. So that's mostly my rebuttal.
And certainly makes sense, and I do agree on basically every point. But there's one massive issue with that, and there is the enforcement of it. Because at the end of the day, we live in a bunch of republics, barring a few specific exemptions, which are notorious for inefficient law enforcement. A system is great, but no matter how good it is, if it is not built in compatibility with how it is being enforced, that is still a problem. Same thing applies to socialism and its sister communism, but simply ignoring them because it's not entirely their own fault isn't really fair either.
On this note, 1 second, I will say so. Firstly,
Yeah, the Costco thing is a great example, and I've seen some of the stuff. Fucking great. Just especially in North America, Canada, the US, and Mexico, it's not really feasible unless you make massive changes to government, and then you're gonna have to make massive changes to laws, because it's completely outside of American jurisdiction to even consider and mandating those kinds of things without
Hold up.
pressing the realm.
I never said mandating. I think that the government should give subsidies to startups who treat their workers better, and we should create a scale and a system that does that. So I think that we should have some sort of regulation for that. That's what I was talking about specifically.
Okay, so
I don't believe in forcing companies by gunpoint to do things.
You basically want to basically push with benefits, regulation or stuff, companies into treating their workers better. But
yes,
I would argue if you need the state to do that, why not get rid of the problem in the first place? Like, think about it. If the companies are kind of greedy and they want their profits, so they're kind of not really going to improve the workers' condition by themselves. So the government needs to step in. You might as well get rid of the companies and just get the government to step in directly.
I disagree with that.
There's a lot of issues with it, primarily fiscal.
And yeah, on another note, yes. I must admit to the fact that Soviet workers weren't really treated that much better than in capitalist countries, which is true and factual. I would add, but I wouldn't really make the wrong assumption that the Soviet economy is the best socialist economy ever existed and the only one that shall ever exist. So, considering the flaws of the Soviet economic organization, which are clear, are recognized, like, for example, I know them. I have some stuff regarding the early days, so the NEP, which was a very big mistake from my analysis, and also the later days with Stalin and Khrushchev, Brezhnev, Gorbachev, Perestroika and stuff. And yeah, like, what I would like to say is that the Soviet economy was heavily flawed, yes, but the bases were there. It was also heavily corrupt, which is not as as we also argued about before, it's not inherent in the socialist system. And it's more of a complicated matter that makes it seems like it's totally inherent to the level of the social government, because a little bit of corruption, bad apples always exist, but the quantity and scale of this problem was kind of exaggerated by the material conditions of the country at the time, which, if you want, I can also explain. But that's the basis, basically. So I think as we also propose, my organization slash party, not really simple, but actually complicated reconstruction of what the Soviets essentially did, but on more actual socialist basis. We also have to consider it's a very complicated matter, and I don't want to take too much time.
Okay, are you done?
Well, yeah, but I'm very open to questions, because I could
Okay,
go
so-
about this for like half an hour.
My first point is I'm just going to respond to your first point about Costco. So I was saying that we should push for it to be a business model, because your counterpoint to that was, well, we should just state mandate everything, because if their whole idea is just profit or whatever, but it's been shown time and time again that Costco makes profit and they're very efficient at what they do. They have very good business strategies and they reward their workers for it, which leads back into their business, which is sort of like a microeconomics version of Keynesianism, which is like very, very evident to work. Even if we look at some worker co-op controlled companies like Winco Foods, they do this similar stuff and they are rewarded for it. So like the idea that capitalism always will lead to profit and exploitation is just not true. I think if we understand the organizational structures and how our own belief systems work, and we reduce corruption, I think that we can easily create a system that functions far better. That's my point. So I'm going to respond to your second point, or if you want to respond to it, you can, since you haven't got to talk much. You want to respond to that, the second point he had about the Soviet Union?
Truthfully,
Well,
I feel
one second. I didn't really close it. I must admit, but as I said, if you want, we can talk. We can keep talking about that specifically. But yeah, I cannot just do a single rant about it.
You know what? That's fine. We can ignore that point for now. We'll push it aside for later. But I think the biggest thing that we need to consider in this conversation is the relationship between worker and employer. I think the biggest problem that I see with communists and socialists is that the way that they view the worker-employee relationship is inherently exploitive, because one side has more authority over the other, when I view that as inherently flawed. When you look at it, you can't have a business without workers or bosses, right? That is inherently how I view it. You can operate them without bosses, but it's incredibly difficult and it hardly ever works. There has been no system, as far as I can tell, that has been able to effectively organize people without any sort of hierarchy in said system, right? So when we look at that, instead of saying, well, we must have a hierarchy, maybe we should say, how should we view said hierarchy, right? We started with feudalism, and it evolved into capitalism, and then eventually it tried to evolve into socialism, but failed. Because I think that capitalism is probably the peak of our economic system. For now, I digress. The point that I'm making here is that employers are providing opportunities to work, and they're organizing the ability to work, while employees are allowing that work to be done. That is the biggest way I can explain that relationship. And I think that, as Polonium said, with Costco, benefits for your employees are amazing, right? We should heavily encourage that. But the problem that I see is that a lot of the times people hand wave these as simply just token benefits to satisfy the people. I think instead of looking at it as your boss is your enemy or your employees are savages, right? We should look at it as instead, how can I scratch your back so that you'll scratch mine?
I think that here the inherent problem it's basically projecting the capitalist system into the socialist one. So in your opinion, it's inevitable to have an exploitative relation in a socialist one, but not in a capitalist one. Like that seems rather how can I put it, ridiculous. Like currently, your employer gives you a job. You do your job. You get a rather small fraction of your surplus value, which is then taken by the employer for his own profit. Like it's not doing out of charitable thoughts or anything. Like your employer gives you a job because it's convenient for him. And on another note, well, as I said, the Soviet system was heavily flawed, and one flaw was the rather weak democracy in the workspace itself. Because the point is, in a socialist economy, you always need someone not not necessarily at the top, because I wouldn't really call that. I would say someone that helps manage everything, because if we propose a planned economy, it has to actually be planned by someone, and especially immediately, the workers cannot really completely do it by themselves on a very large scale. And so the point of an ideal, let's say ideal, because I mean, would be the best option. A socialist economy would be having elected representatives on the workspace. So it's not really a boss; it's a person that is democratically elected by the people he works with, and also it's it's instantly revocable through another vote. So a very big point of a direct representation system like this, it's that it's pretty hard to actually abuse of your power, because if you do it and the system is done properly, the persons that voted you in the first place can kick you out with another vote. So at the end, it's a filtration system that leaves only the best according to the workers themselves.
Okay, so your point, or Mythic, would you want to go?
I was a bit gone there for a minute. I was digging into the Costco thing and looking at that. I've got a bunch I can say on that, or if you guys want to stay on what you're currently talking about, I could forfeit for a little while longer.
Okay, well, I mean, okay, I'll respond to your point. I mean, about democratically elected workspaces. I mean, I don't disagree with democratically elected workspaces. I just don't think that we should force people to do them. I think people should be able to organize themselves the way they want under a free society. But I think that the proper methods of organization that lead to people and companies functioning better ultimately are going to be the organizations that people choose in the long run. And if we do that, capitalism is very great at innovating and being flexible. So one thing it will reward people on is, improving on things and finding things, and it will reward people for that. So, like, if we create a system and a societal understanding that if we do improve upon things such as, like I said, like the Costco method, if we push for that, we will get a society that functions better. The problem, though, is with socialism inherently, there's so many issues with it. It also depends what kind of socialism you push for, because like if you say democratic socialism or like some form of social democracy, then that's pretty similar to what I believe. But if you were talking about something more radical like socialism, like actual classic socialism or classical communism, then there's different calculation issues with it. It just doesn't fiscally work.
I would say that's rather arguable. And to give a straight definition and to base this discussion upon, I uphold the idea of dictatorship of the proletariat, which no, it's a class dictatorship. It's not meant to be a personal dictatorship. It's a class dictatorship in the sense that one class, the proletariat, rules over all the others, which all the others it's just the bourgeoisie, which is a ridiculously small minority, and then doesn't really matter at that point, because if the 99.9% of the population rules over the 0.0.1, I don't really see the issue in that, especially if the 0.01% was exploiting the other 99. So yeah, like that's kind of the point. And also one second, we are missing a central point of the discussion, in my opinion, that the capitalist system and a socialist system have two completely different ideas and goals. Capitalist system, you want constant growth, almost infinite growth, I would say, which is impossible in a finite world and universe. Well, I mean, the universe could technically be infinite, but it's a theory. And secondly, we are not exactly moving at its own pace. We are pretty slow. Like we haven't even reached Mars with actual astronauts, for example. And so yeah, you cannot really argue for the infinity of resources, which therefore make an infinite growth kind of impossible. And instead, and also a capitalist system also strives for constant and always bigger profits. Instead, a socialist one forcefully acknowledges the limitations given by the resources we have currently and we will have in the future. So I think it's more realistic in its goal and how to reach it. And the goal itself is the well-being of the people. And I think that's very important to understand and keep in mind during this conversation.
Okay.
I think I would like.
So okay, I'll let you speak, Mythic, and then I have a couple questions just to kind of drive the conversation a little bit.
Do you mind if I respond to that after Mythic speaks, or?
Yeah, that works. Yeah, we can do that.
Yeah. So the most pressing problem with the the dictatorship of the proletariat thing is, you mentioned the bourgeoisie as a ridiculously small class. If you're a little hard on my end, so before I continue, I just want to say or ask. That's what you said, correct? They're the minority oppressing the majority,
Right
kind of thing.
Yes, currently yes.
So, in almost every developed country on Earth, the bourgeoisie is the majority by anywhere from 50 to 70%.
I'm sorry. This is the delusional statement because, well, what is your what exactly is your definition of bourgeoisie?
The classical definition of the term, which translates roughly to the modern middle class. I don't. What else would I be meaning? I mean, obviously that then loops in the upper class in practice very clearly, but like the bourgeoisie is constantly trashed by socialism and communism. It's the majority of the current population of, say, North America, South America, Europe, a good chunk of certain parts of Asia, and all of Oceania.
I
That's-
would I will stop you here because I think that's rather wrong. Like the majority of the workers defining them as bourgeoisie, it's rather delusional. Like I will call myself a proletarian, not a bloody bourgeois. Like I have an house, yes, I can manage to get to the end of the month, but that's the limitation of my luxuries. Like by bourgeoisie, we usually mean actually the people that can be actually considered filthy rich, or to put it even simpler, who has the economic capabilities to own means of production and exploit workers to generate profit from those means of production, with the goal of getting even more, and it goes on and on and on. That's kind of the point. So like no, obviously it depends on your definition, but like by my definition, bourgeois can be defined as billionaires and millionaires to some extent, even because you have to get kind of specific in your definition. At the end of the day, yes, it's a very small minority. And also, I think that a thing that I forgot to mention, which it's actually my bad, in a dictatorship of the proletariat, the bourgeoisie, it's slowly absorbed into the proletariat. So like you size their means of production, so they don't really have anything to live with. So they are forced to become a normal proletariat and work like everyone else. So essentially, more than actually oppressing them, you initially simply size their excessive wealth and then give them the benefits that are given to everyone else. So a sort of leveling.
Yeah. But in that case, that does back in the secondary question of what of middle class in this dictatorship of the proletariat, because you're seizing the means of production, and in most countries, well, not by value, by mass and economic mass, a large chunk in the U.S., if memory serves, almost half, not quite, I think it's 40%, maybe 45, of businesses, companies, manufacturing sites, especially the more classical, like how people used to think of working class now, like actual manufacturers. A lot of those are owned and operated by people that I'm not really sure we could call exploiters.
Well.
I mean,
In fact, this is also a kind of debated topic. So basically, as I said, I was talking mainly about whoever exploits. Because I mean, if I open, I don't know, my own bakery and I'm the baker, I'm working for myself. So that's an actually particular situation. But also we have to remember that basically, for example, in my opinion, those people that work for themselves, or even like I don't know, to make the example of co-ops. Like if you treat your workers fairly, surely there is less of a need of an urgent intervention, because also you have to understand that capitalism and socialism, you cannot change with a fucking light switch. It's a gradual change. So basically, as we also propose, my party, we firstly propose in the case we were elected or a revolution happened and we came out as the new government, we firstly proposed the nationalization of essential stuff like major industries, like I'm talking about very big companies, like the biggest ones, the banks, private systems, private hospitals or schools, transportation, because like in Italy, the government, sadly, like 40 years ago, sold basically every single railroad to fucking private companies, and also part of the bus system. So yeah, it's a gradual change. So yeah, firstly you go for the big fishes, and then and then slowly and also more gently, I would say, you go for the smaller ones. Like I don't know, if I have my own bakery under socialism, I can still run it. I can also maybe I don't know, call thegamer's bakery, but I classify as a state employee like everyone else, so I get the same benefit. I can live a comfortable and happy life doing what in this example I like doing, so baking, but I'm not any different from anyone else. So like no one loses and everyone wins. That's kind of the point of it.
I mean, by definition, plenty of people lose. Some, the big fish that deserve it. Many will be the burger class that the original term of bourgeoisie came from, which in the modern age are far from being a small group. And then there's, of course, the reality of the upper and hell, even the middle class would likely be losing privileges as well. And what of the companies that, as you said, like the ones that were treating their employees fairly? What would happen to them? Because I highly
Right.
suspect they won't be given the free pass.
Well, no, of course not. But like if you treat your workers more fairly than others, this is obviously a factor that should be recognized. So I don't know. Let's talk. I don't know. Let's make the example of Costco. For example, maybe a company that treats its workers well could be nationalized, because everything will be nationalized. But there is one type of nationalization and another. So like, I don't know, Costco, if for example the workers were actually kind of happy of working there, they could, on their demand, on a vote, decide who to kick and who to keep. Because I don't know, maybe the CEO is actually a nice guy that knows how to do his job, and in a socialist system, if he knows how to do his job, he will become as a state employee, fixed salary, same benefits, keeping his job. But like someone like Elon Musk will be kicked out of the door, like to say simply, you know.
Yes.
Like I'm a very big fan of the saying, give to Kaiser what's of Kaiser. So like you reap what you sow. So like at the end of the day, yeah, you reap what you sow. Some fucking companies, in my opinion, should be nationalized with priority, because maybe they treat their workers badly, and others with secondary priority, because, as I said, treat their workers decently. But at the end, in my opinion, everything should be nationalized.
Everything.
Yes.
How is this going to create innovation though? Like the whole point.
I was
think,
let it rip,
like,
man.
there's this whole thank you. There's this whole like I think there's a misunderstanding with how capitalism works. Like the goal of it. I think the biggest problem that I'm observing here is that capitalism's goal is to infinitely grow. That's just not true. The point of capitalism is to grow until you basically can't, and then from there you innovate on what you've already made. So, for example, what we did with horses, right? At first, we kind of just walked around everywhere when we were fucking cavemen, right? But then what happened is we said, hey, we can domesticate a bunch of things and we can make stuff go way faster than we could if we were just walking around. So we started developing a horse industry. And then eventually we're like, horses kind of suck. Like you kind of have to enslave an animal to get around from point A to point B. How about we make a machine to do it? And it turns out this machine's way faster and it's way more efficient than a horse ever would be. So then we developed that. And eventually we get to the point where now we've become so advanced in terms of technology in that field, we don't even use horses anymore except for entertainment. So that's one example of how capitalism progresses, right? But in a socialist system, I would imagine that you have your horse industry and you don't innovate beyond that because there's no reason to, besides maybe this like vague, naive sense of patriotism, maybe. But that it just doesn't make sense. I don't see where your innovation comes from. Especially because I think the biggest thing that capitalism does is it takes the greed that people have, because a big thing that people point out is that companies have greed, but that's not true. People have greed, and then companies use that greed to make a relationship, right? The relationship is between the employee and employer, and they make stuff. That stuff has a certain value, which is represented by money, and then that money is split between the worker and the employer, and the worker not evenly. You're right, and there's a reason for that. The reason for that is because the employer had to take way more risk to do what he did than the worker did, because the worker essentially has job security. If they have like an ability to do something, they will always have a job. This is the idea that capitalism has. If you are good at something, you will always have a place in our society. We will always have a spot in the workplace for you, and you should be justly compensated for that.
And that's noble, but I wouldn't say it's universally true.
It's not noble. That's just how it is. I mean, that's why we have unions. That's why we have other representatives of how we can organize, right? I mean, like, I'm not anti-union. I'm not no fucking corporate bootlicker, right? I think that in a society you should always have tension between your employee and employer. You should always be struggling for more on your side or more on the other person's side, right? Because that creates our healthy balance, right? When you're always it's this idea that MLK and even Marx engaged in, we're like, a society is always going to have tension as long as there's class. But the distinction between MLK and Marx is that Marx wants to get rid of the class, while MLK recognizes that the class system is not inherently bad. It's how that system is organized that might be bad or flawed, right? In his case, it was racial. In Marx's case, it was economic, right? And I think that's just a fundamental misunderstanding on Marx's part, is that classes are not inherently bad, and an imbalance of power is not necessarily bad. The only problem is when it gets... Why would it be bad?
No. Why wouldn't it be inherently bad? Like, explain it.
Why would... Hold on, what?
He's asking.
Why? No, yeah, I'm gonna repeat my question. Why the existence of classes shouldn't be inherently bad?
Because classes are a way of organizing. There is no other distinction between classes besides how we organize them, right? If you get rid of classes, you're still going to have the same organization system, but the word class just describes a certain type of individual, right? In this case, in the economic sense, it's how much wealth someone has or how much material potential they have, right? That is essentially what money is. It's a valuing of material potential or material reality.
Okay, well, if I can, firstly, I can have to respond to the other argument, but firstly, I wanna close this one. The point is that with socialism and communism, you don't destroy the existence of classes. Since a system of classes needs multiple classes, if you have only one remaining, in this case the proletariat, essentially you don't have any more a class system, because if you have a single class, you don't have classes. You have a
Why
single
is that
one.
preferable?
What?
Why is that preferable to the current system?
Well, on many aspects, because like, firstly, in my opinion, saying that classes are inherently bad, it's in fact true and correct, because all along history, and with history, the history of classes, because classes were basically always a thing since almost forever. Since we started organizing in a serious matter, the relationship was always exploited. You had the plebs and the partisans, you had the king, the nobles and the serfs, the peasants. You have the rich capitalist and the worker. Like, I don't see the mutually beneficial relationship.
I have to cut you off there, because the problem between all of those things that you described is that between king and noble and between noble and serf, the problem is that there is no recompensation for the work that the serfs do or the work that the nobles do, right? Everyone pays their dues to the king or the noble or whoever comes up above them. But the problem is that in capitalism, we've evolved beyond that system of servitude because of loyalty or some vague, naive sense of, oh, well, this is divine rule or whatever, right? The thing with capitalism is that we've moved beyond that and we decide workers have value inherently in the work that they do. Because without the work that they do, there would be no king, there would be no nobles. So why would we treat them as if they are serfs? Why not treat them as if they are actual workers? They are providing something for our society and we value said work. That is the reason why our system is organized the way that it is. That's just inherent to the whole idea of paying, right? The whole idea of wage work or like salary work is because we value the work that you do. So therefore, we're gonna treat you like a worker or like some kind of noble. I guess it would be the equivalent.
I got the point, but you seem to think that like capitalism invented like wages or salaries. Why we say the salary? Where this word comes from? The word salary.
No.
Very careful.
It comes from Latin. I don't remember the Latin term, but basically, in Rome, when like there was a lack of money to pay soldiers, especially. Since the only way to preserve wood and meat in particular, which was expensive, was salt, which was also a pretty expensive commodity in Roman times. So not really capitalism, more like a slave-based economy, which also had actual workers that were paid. On this, I will suggest a very good book that it's called Class War in the Roman Republic. Pretty interesting book. So yeah, basically, it's not like paying people to do work. It's not exactly a new concept.
It never has.
The difference.
I would agree with that, but I think that the thing that we're ignoring here is that the difference is that in socialism you aren't paid for your work. You're just basically you're given this sense of pride. Is that the idea of like the work? Because like the whole point of capitalism is that we use the greed of people and we gather that greed and we manifest it through money, and that's the whole point. Is that you are organizing yourself based on the value of your work, which is represented through capital or like money. So I mean, again, how is this preferable necessarily?
Okay, well, the
Well-
point in a socialist system is that you don't really get paid for your work, but your necessities are assured through your work. So like you need to eat. So like if the farmers don't farm, they don't eat, and you also don't eat. If the farmers don't have the tools, the tool maker doesn't have the food, and the farmers don't have the food. So even if even if a socialist system still has money, so it's in its early stages, you could say money it's transformed into a simple way to more easily distribute and organize the distribution of commodities. Like at the end of the day, the point is destroying the value of money to then, as I said, remove it, because the point is communism, so yeah, moneyless. And yeah, like the point is that socialism is basically a mutual social contract. So basically, I do my part, which is rather small because it's divided between everyone, and by doing my little part, I know that everyone else will be able to do their little part, and so everyone will have everything that they need without losing their minds working or something. Like that's kind of the premise. Because also socialists value time. I think that working for money and money being totally essential to survive is kind of disgusting, because then you're giving value to time, and time, considering it's rather limited, even if you could argue it's kind of long, but not really. Like you have to think about it, and whatever could happen in the meantime, not everyone is gonna live until like 100 years old. So like I don't really like this valuation of time.
Well, I mean, the problem with that is that in socials, as you described, you still work for, and like your time is still valuable in capitalism, and we give you money for your work. But the problem with socialism is that they value your time. You're given basic necessities, but there's no incentive to innovate beyond basic necessities, right? Or at least not to
No,
mass
no, 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 no.
No, hold on. Like, if you were to make a computer, why on earth would I ever mass produce this computer if there's no incentive for me to do that, right? I might make one for me, my friend, and maybe my family, right? But there's no incentive for me to mass produce a computer. Why would I ever do that?
Well, if no, you're
Yeah.
kind of missing the you're kind of missing the point. So basically, you say that innovation in capitalism. I don't really want to argue about the goal of capitalism, because I mean I have already given my input. But whatever it is, it drives progression, right? Progress. By saying that there can be no progress in socialism, you are saying that socialism has no goal. But that is fundamentally wrong, because socialism has goals: the good and the livelihood of the people, and secondly, for a communist in particular, reaching communism, which needs a very high level of progression in all fields, technology, medicine, and stuff. So like the main difference is that progress in capitalism is either driven by someone's goodwill. Like, to make a very lovely example that I always use, insulin, the thing that it's basically a life-saving thing for people with diabetes, right?
Right, invented in Canada, a capitalist system, but yeah.
Yeah, but the story goes a little bit deeper. So basically, the inventors invented it, and they didn't.
Manufacture?
No.
Donate?
Yeah. They didn't patent it, because science, it was a life-saving medicine, and it was rather cheap to produce. Like at the time, I don't remember which quantity, but like, well, it was essentially rather cheap to produce. I don't remember the exact quantity, but like the one those scientists made was like $1, or a Canadian dollar of the time. So right now would be maybe $4. And as I said, those guys, out of the good of their art, they thought that life-saving medicine, cheap, we don't patent it, so everyone can produce it. Now in America, it's like $600 for insulin, which capitalism. Like,
You know why?
because it's a medicine that you need to fucking survive if you have diabetes. So
That's not the reason why it's $600. The thing that the whole reason that we have a patent system on like medicine and stuff is that Like for example, Tylenol. Tylenol is dirt cheap to make, but the research and development cost that goes into it is extraordinary. So if you didn't patent Tylenol, all of a sudden you'd have a bunch of people who are just making the pills for the cheap price, and you would go out of business because you have to pay for the research and development, and now you're the sucker because you paid the scientists to make that, you innovated for that, and now all of that risk that you took got fucking blown away because you have to pay your scientists and your other workers who actually had to take the time to create this invention. The other guy just has to take the blueprints from you and say, oh, well, we mix a little bit of oxygen, a little bit of carbon, blah, 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 right? That's the reason we have the patent system. It's to keep scientists in jobs, because without that, you have a system where the scientist makes something, the scientist isn't compensated, and then the scientist is basically screwed over. Right? There's no reward for his work.
Patents, in fact, are needed in a capitalist system, but that's a limitation of the capitalist system itself. Because, for example, in the Soviet Union, a good thing, there were no patents. Like,
wait, really
but,
quick, are you admitting the USSR was communist, or are you saying that this is just like an aspect of communism in the Soviet Union?
it's an aspect. It's a good aspect of socialism and then communism. So, like, to make it clear, I will define socialism as a lower stage of communism, because
Right.
at the end, if you think about it, you start from socialism and your end goal is communism. In the case of all a communist, a socialist will stop at socialism, but that's another thing. You know. So yeah, I was saying basically, yeah, in the Soviet Union, a good thing that there were no patents. So basically, if a scientist discovered, funded by the state, so the state gave him money to do his research. He did his research. He got something out of it. He discovered something. He got his rightful recognition. So everyone knows that he discovered that, but like it ends there because he already has what he needs. Everyone can benefit from that because everything was state funded, and now the state will produce that medicine or thing discovered.
Right, but I think you're missing the point where, like you have that medicine, the state produces it, but then I guess the scientist does the scientist get the same as everyone else? And like, why would I put in that much extra work? Where I can just work at a factory and put bottle caps on bottles. There's no reason for me to, again, there's no incentive for me to take on that harder job for no extra reward or anything like that, right? There's a reason why we give neurosurgeons like millions of dollars. So they have to go through intensive medical training. They have to go through college. They have to get a doctorate, and whenever they're specializing in it, it's a very specific field, and you're paying them millions of dollars, not just because of the skill that it takes, but because they have to go through the training and all the time that it took to get to that position. And so again, right, how is socialism going to incentivize this work? It just doesn't work. And on top of that, when we look at scientists from the Soviet Union, they aren't even great. They're actually some of the worst scientists I think I can name. There's this guy, his name is Trofim Lysenko. He's from Ukraine. At the time, is part of the USSR. He was born before. He was during the revolution. He's a staunch communist, right? He rejected Mendelian genetics in favor of his own idea, Lysenkoism, which is essentially becomes a really large idea in communist countries like China and the USSR. And
that's wrong, yes, but like another issue I have with Stalin is that he wasn't really a scientific man. Like he believed.
Well, this isn't Stalin. This also influences Mao and the. This influences after Stalin too. After the death of Stalin,
Marxism, Leninism. At the end of the day,
this guy was around for Lenin. This guy influenced Lenin too. I don't know what your contention is here.
I know the name, and it's a rarity that I know names like this. Yeah, he was around, man.
Yeah,
I'm not really sure about that.
He was one of the major influencers of Soviet agricultural sciences and Soviet economics, and he believed in the kolkhoz system, and he believed in collective farming and planting crops close together, eliminating pests, and that's where that whole campaign from Mao came from. This guy essentially exported pseudoscientific ideas that led to famines. So, like,
yes,
the Soviet Union has a very, very, very poor, low level, and communism just in general seems to have this low bar for scientific standards and research. Whereas,
I think,
I
think that's 1 second. I will continue later. I think that's another fallacy, an association fallacy. So basically, as as you try to associate Marxism-Leninism in particular often with communism, here you are trying to associate Soviet science that at sometimes which were a little bit too many in my opinion, was rather ridiculous, and it's a fact, to science in general. So like you are taking a particular example and saying everything is like that. So I don't know about it.
I
No,
mean,
I didn't say everything was like that. I'm just saying that like the methodology seems to be very lacking in general in communism.
Yes, you
If this
said
guy who had totally unbased, unscientific claims can walk around and influence millions of country, or like not millions of countries, but like millions of people, and eventually lead to their deaths, then like I don't think that's a
you are
system
essentially
very
saying
good.
that it's an inherent problem. That's my point, which
It
it's
is.
a
It is an
correlation
inherent
fallacy in my
problem.
opinion.
Can I?
Yeah, Mythic. Go ahead.
Yeah,
Right.
go.
So there's another massive issue with this that I don't think we discussed on. So I like to think I'm especially clued in on this, as my paternal side is Habsburg Imperial old money, and my maternal is old Soviet and Polish and some Czech oligarch money from before the Iron Curtain fell. And yes, they were oligarchs. They don't have a fucking name. They indeed got benefits. In fact, they tended to get far more benefits for a lot of the shit like this than, ironically, the ones that did the most damage seemed to profit more than any Western scientists I've ever fucking known of for their creations, proclaimed heroes of the Soviet Union or of the Warsaw Pact or any other number of things. And furthermore, I wouldn't advise using examples of a large coalition of states and entities that still not only used money, but provided pretty substantial increases into people's living standards in exchange for this kinds of things. They were not being given the same treatment as anyone else after they did these things. They were given all but lives of luxury, and even attempting to say that that was a product of any form of that economic system as opposed to doing the same thing capitalists do. Hey, you want to live in a mansion? The only difference is some of them were offered shit tons of money, and some of them were offered shit tons of things. It varied. But they still weren't doing it for any other reason but compensation. And they didn't even do a good fucking job most of the time, which makes it even worse. That's why the Iron Curtain was such a bitch on our end, man. I mean, come on. I'm not quite old
never
enough to
said
remember
the
it, but
Iron Curtain
that's-
was good.
Okay, wait, I didn't want to derail from that previous point, like, because I was going to talk about more about Trofim, because, like, you asked how this is an inherent issue of communism. It's the fact that communism tends to politicize everything, since everything is under state control and the dictatorship of the proletariat. Like, this is, like, a very common thing, and it's pretty much happened through literally every socialist and communist regime throughout history. Not every socialist regime, but, like, almost every communist regime or communist state that has been founded has these sort of ideas. And it's the fact that, like, when you politicize everything and everything gets under mob rule, what happens is that decisions and laws and checks and balances and skilled people get thrown out the window. So if there was skilled people around, you know, like if Stalin didn't purge as many of his people or Lenin didn't purge as many people who are skilled, get
Lenin
rid of them
purging
all.
people? Okay, well, that's another matter.
Hold up. I'm not done. You know, if he weren't to purge these people, this guy would not have gotten as much of his influence as he did. And this is an issue, in my opinion, inherently with communism. It's a flaw because it does not allow for as many checks and balances, and it politicizes absolutely everything. Because, like I said, everything has to be under state control economically. So you get people like this who don't actually know what they're talking about, and there's not as many means and measures, but because he's politically favorable, he gets put in charge to do these things, and you get millions of people dying. Like, I don't understand how that is an inherent part of or flaw of communism.
Okay, you pointed out the exact reason why it isn't an inherent issue in what you said. So basically, you said that he was politically favorable, which is true. As I said, Stalin in particular was a pretty big fan of not really scientific theories, and he promoted and even implemented them, which brought disastrous results as the destruction of the entire hills. And so basically, this is a whole other argument, but basically the main issue with the Soviet system and basically all of the ones that came after it, is that basically, as I've also tried of explaining a couple of times, some people understood, some didn't, and now I'm gonna try to do it by voice, maybe that's clearer. Basically, you have the October Revolution, it happens. You have the revolutionaries, first big successful revolution that actually lasted for a while, and so, we can all agree that Stalin and Lenin were fundamentally different, right? At least on this point.
Right, but they still are both genuinely awful people in terms of what they
Why?
did. Well, Lenin is one because he's letting this he's perpetuating the system, and he basically creates the system where someone like Trofim Lysenko can gain power, and he can basically he can kill he can just sell this basic like pseudoscience, and then it led to the deaths of millions of people. Unironically, this is one of the reasons that the Great Famine happened in 32 and 31.
Okay, well, then following your reasoning, democracy is bad because you can vote for it. Like,
No, not democracy, capitalism, because capitalism would have had someone who was competing against him and actually had the valid ideas of Mendelic genetics to actually oppose him and actually get like an actual result, right? The only reason this guy was able to do it
you are
was
missing the point once
he was
again. If
money.
if you let me finish for 1 second, as I was saying, well, okay, we don't fundamentally agree that they were really different, but I would argue they were, and the main issue here is that, as you might know, Stalin had to purge quite a large number of people to get to power, and the remainder mainly, and
Lenin, yeah.
Lenin didn't. Like, what are you
I
even
mean,
talking
what was the
about?
Civil War all about? I mean, this is the whole thing. You have Lenin leading the Reds against the Whites, and then the Blacks and everyone else, the Green Army and all that.
Yes, yes,
The whole
yes,
point is that, but here's the thing: you have to kill a lot of innocent people to make this omelet. You have to break a lot of eggs for this omelet, and it gets to a point where how many eggs do you have to break to make an omelet, man? Because there's a lot of Orthodox priests getting killed to make this omelet. There's about 85,000.
Okay, okay.
All right. I'm gonna
Don't
step
worry.
in here for a second. I just want to add, I make omelets every Sunday. It only takes about 3. I am gonna keep this open like we've been doing it. I'm gonna give it 15 more minutes, and then I think we can get into closing statements.
No, okay. So let's be quick. What I was saying is that fundamentally, with Stalin, there was a shift in focus and mainly leadership. Because according to the Marxist-Leninists, basically 90% of the people that essentially did the revolution in 1917 were traitors. So he executed them and put in charge his own people.
Wait, but how do you determine that
leading
they're traitors? That's the real because there was no court for this. Really, it was just on the spot, like
It
decision.
was a baseless claim, yes, because Stalin needed to get rid of them to remain in
No,
power.
it was also Lenin too when he was during the
No.
revolution. So yeah, I mean, sure. What do you mean? Like
What do you
fighting
think
the
happened to the moderates, man?
You are
Exactly.
comparing you are comparing apples to, I don't know, pineapples. What you're missing here is that Stalin simply purged people for political reasons. The Bolsheviks were fighting a civil war, which it's a civil war in the 20th century. So
Doesn't
like
excuse genocide. If it was America doing the same thing, I would condemn America for the same reason. That genocide's not cool, bro. Like you can't just kill a whole religious group because they are supposedly helping the Tsar, and you can't just kill a bunch of Orthodox priests because of that, right?
I
Just
mean,
like
I
you can't
as a
support a bunch of Chechens for being Muslim and the USSR, what Stalin did, right? So again, like
Stalin, and also apart from that, as I said, I find the execution of priests are rather questionable. Yes, like
even questionable.
I personally don't support it, but I also don't find it as the worst thing that ever happened. Like in a civil war context, also.
But
Like
this wasn't also done in a civil war context either. Like Stalin just did this on his own and killed
yeah,
like they
Stalin.
literally
We can
talk
both
about
agree.
how
We can both
what?
agree. Stalin was a fucking piece of shit, but we can agree on that. Yeah.
Okay, but like still like the point that I was making is that politicization, and then when you have rapid politicization and then you have an economy which is now in control, this political group is in control of, it's not going to lead to good outcomes. And that's like a main problem with communism is that it pushes
Okay,
for rapid
and
reforms immediately.
returning on track, that was an issue that was mainly that manifested mainly with the rise of Stalin in 1924. Like, you cannot really blame the earlier Soviet government for that. You know,
I'm gonna blame
Uh,
the Soviet government for that because they were they're employing people who had
the earlier Soviet
scientific
government.
ideas, and
Yeah, we're blaming them.
like I'm going to blame the government who puts these people in charge. Like I don't know
Yes, the
why.
Marxist-Leninist government, and here lies the ideological dispute between us and them. Like, and not getting into that because we are limited time. What you're still missing is the fact that, as I also explained in another conversation written, all revolutions after the October Revolution, since Stalin took power not too much after and lived for too long, in my opinion, sadly. Yeah. Mostly, if not all revolutions after the October Revolution, were shaped around what Stalin created in the USSR, which, if you would ask me, it's not either what Marx wrote about, it's not what Engels wrote about, it's not what Lenin wrote about. So, taking that an example for communism or socialism, it's not inherently wrong because I mean, at the end, there was a degeneration, but as the word implies, it's a degeneration, and also making it the norm because, well, as I said, all the revolutions after the October Revolution were essentially Marxist-Leninist, with slight variation. You know, there are various flavors of Marxist-Leninism. As an example, Marxism-Leninism, Maoism, which is basically a socialism with Chinese characteristics, and Mao's thought in even shorter terms. So
Actually, just
basically,
to mention really quick, the the trophy Livsenko guy earlier, he also worked for the Mao government, or not, maybe not worked for them, but his works heavily inspired them, and that's what caused the Great Famine in 59 to like
yes,
61.
because
Right. This
because
again. This isn't just like a Russia thing. This is a Chinese thing. This is
I
North
never
Korean
say that,
thing.
but if you let me finish,
There
as I
was
was
not
saying,
stamps.
it's your premise. It's wrong because you're saying that basically Marxism-Leninism it's the only it's the only flavor. Yes, let's call it flavor, even if it's I wouldn't even go as far as calling that because joke ideology, in my opinion.
I never said
You
it was
know,
the only flavor. I'm not
no,
claiming
no,
that.
no, 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 no. In the way you talk, you make it sound like it is because
Okay.
no, 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 no. It makes sense to make an example from what actually happened, but also, in my opinion, what you guys lack, it's even basic, if I can say, even a basic comprehension of the other schools of thought and propositions. Because, like, yeah, in my opinion, your field of view is highly limited by the simple fact, in my opinion, you see Marxism-Leninism or Stalinism, to just don't say Marxism-Leninism 20 times because yeah, my throat is killing me. Stalinism as basically the only thing imaginable, which is rather wrong if you're having a
Okay,
discussion
no,
about
I don't believe that. Hold up. So
Yeah.
you're throwing around a lot of misnomers about what I think. I don't have just one view. My point is that what if communism, is so good, if it's such a functional system, why is every single communist regime on the planet risen up and either started mass political purges, genocides, or support unscientific ideas? Not to mention the fact that the regimes or the
you miss the
groups
point.
that aren't just Marxist-Leninists or Stalinists, anarchists, they get crushed. They get obliterated. They don't even stand a chance because
Like
the problem is inherently their organizational structures are not fit for running large governments, and that inherently communist economies just cannot function because of economic calculation problem. They're always wasting extra resources. They're always unoptimized. The economy is always unoptimized for whatever threat it's facing. Yes, it can sometimes be good, where you need to produce a lot of weaponry or something, but it often will lead to the ends of starvation at the end, or it will lead to severe lack of consumer goods, which never really stopped until Brezhnev's period. So, like, I don't I don't know what you're talking about. Like you're
No,
just saying
no.
I lack perspective, but you're not providing any perspective that is a
Yeah.
feasible or suitable alternative. So like, what am I supposed to think?
Well, because I'm kind of busy trying to explain to you that like maybe you don't realize it, but by the way you talk and also water, maybe water even more than you, but I would say that you also to some degree. If you want to know my perspective, we can talk about that. But if you keep bringing up basically only Marxism, Leninism, we kind of get stuck in that swamp.
Okay.
Wait, I
Then
hate
go
to
ahead,
interrupt,
explain
but like
yourself.
We can go
totally
to South America, man, but I'm not sure you want to do that.
Yeah, like really quick, we talked about how we talked about Maoism in the sense that it's about how the scientific research in regards to Maoism, like this guy's very flimsy scientific theory was able to get past even Maoism, which is an entirely separate thing from Marxist-Leninism or Stalinism or whatever
That's
Brezhnev
kind
and
of a ridiculous claim. Like Maoism, it's kind of its own thing, but
I know
it
that's what I'm saying is
That's what
that
he just
heavily
said.
inspired. It's
we
heavily
don't lack
inspired and
perspective.
derives from.
You just don't like that your ideology doesn't really work when you add in a bunch of different flavors.
And no, because the point that you're kind of missing is that if you start from a wrong premise, you can.
How's my premise wrong? You haven't demonstrated that. You just kept saying that, then going on a different tangent.
No. I was talking about Marxism, Leninism. Marxism, Leninism is the wrong premise. If you elaborate on that, you will never get something right because you are starting from a wrong premise. Like my point that I illustrated maybe even better in the written debate about free college. I cannot find it. But anyways, what I said, and I think I explained it better because I had the time to think about it and how to say it. Substantially, there were basically no actual degenerations after the October Revolution because the October Revolution was essentially the only revolution that could actually fall into a degeneration because it was, in my opinion and from my point of view, the only revolution that started from a good and genuine premise. Like, you are making the general degeneration the norm.
Wait, wait. So, would you say that or the communist movement in China wasn't from a good place? I mean, China was in a pretty shit place, pretty comparable to early Russia during the Russian Revolution, if not actually maybe even worse. Is that not?
No. I never say that. I never say that they were bad. Like if I had to choose between Chiang Kai-shek and Mao, I prefer Mao. But I was talking about it on like communist terms. Like objectively, in my opinion, every single revolution after the October Revolution started from the wrong premise of Marxism-Leninism,
Okay.
which is essentially a dictatorship of a fresh created bureaucratic class, which goes against the essential premise of socialism, communism, the premise of the dictatorship of the proletariat. So like that's kind of my point, you know.
Well, I think the problem there is that you're right, Mythic. I've been talking for a bit. Go ahead.
So, you're marking out. So, just to make this clear, for my understanding, before I go on, we're marking Marxist-Leninism, the largest single branch of communism to ever be fielded in a state-based entity group, off the table.
No. But like, I'm not saying they are irrelevant, but in a serious discussion about socialism and in this case communism, because at this point it's you cannot pretend it's the only thing in
2
existence.
minutes.
Yes.
We aren't. We've gone through the perspectives.
So,
I don't know where you want from us.
the big thing I don't think you're so the reason why a lot of people don't focus on Maoism, particularly in its more proper stages, is because China in its economy can't even be like there's nothing similar to modern Western economies. Now you take Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Poland, the USSR itself; those all functioned on the same premises of industrial society as modern countries to a lesser degree do. Those are the only major communist countries in history of that century, anyways, that truly experienced communism while in a comparable state of what would the word for that be? Development to our own. Like they are the only ones we can draw any experience of a communist attempt at a governance and compare it to how it would work now. It's the only option. I mean, you could take Cuba, but I don't think anyone.
Yeah.
That's not a. That's just gonna make it worse.
It's
And
not even that
then you could
better
take.
of an example. And yeah, like the point is that I'm not in fact dismissing Marxism and Leninism. It's very important, mainly because especially in the last century was the main communist sub ideology that worked. It's a very big word.
I get you.
That managed to rise to power. Let's put it that way. It's better. Yeah.
Yeah, function.
It function, yeah, and like
So now we are going to get to the closing statements. Since I gave the capitalists the first chance to open, I'll go ahead and give you, the gamer, 5 minutes for your final statement.
okay, well, and I guess that we could consider elaborating further on this topic because, like, in my opinion, we are kind of putting in a single pot a lot of random ingredients that, in my opinion, should be on their own plates, be their own dishes. Like, what I'm saying is that, in my opinion, a thing like this rather broad topic, it's a union of smaller topics that are all interconnected, but to tackle these smaller topics one by one, it requires time. So, for example, if we want to talk about what the flows of Marxism-Leninism, its derivations, and maybe the USSR in particular problems were, we can do it. But it's one thing that has to tackled that needs to be tackled on its own. If you want to hear my perspective, my proposal, my corrections of those problems, because yeah, I'm correcting the mistakes of the past. It's essential, learn from history. As I've said like 20 times, whom doesn't learn from history, it's doomed to repeat it. Yeah, that's the quote. Yeah, essentially, like if you want to do another discussion, I can express my own thoughts and maybe make it the center of the discussion, because like here we mostly debated about Marxism, Leninism, in fact, and not like communism and socialism in very general, in my opinion. Like that's kind of the issue. Like I get, as I said, I get the association between Marxism, Leninism, socialism and communism, but we can't stop them. That's my point. And yeah, I end here.
All right. Spider, do you want to go ahead and I'll give you 5 minutes?
All right. So first, it Marxist Lenin, like if we're Marxist Leninism is the most important part of the discussion in terms of socialism and communism because it was the majority. You had a few outliers beyond it, but that by that we would then have to discount the United States of America from the discussion, and we couldn't get anywhere. We compare capitalism, we bring to bear the sort of social democratic EU, and then the US in tow. Those are the two forms. And then you have, for communism, the two juggernauts, Marxist-Leninism and Maoism. And admittedly, that the latter is a bit small in comparison to Marxist-Leninism. One is China, one is half of Europe, and the majority of Asia. It's without a doubt the most important. And
Yes.
beyond that, in terms of economic policy, I'll pull on history. We have functioned off of a financial-based system of motivation for a minimum. We have guarantees of 14,000 years. We know this works. However, ditching currency, ditching that, trying to completely uproot all of the industry and thinking of the majority of not just developed human history, but of human history in general, even of the Neolithic period, which is becoming it's not feasible. There are plenty of things from socialism that works, but this concept of trying to simply remove motivation, I mean, are you telling me that the soldiers that go fight in the trenches should be receiving the same compensation as the dude building boxes? And do you think that the soldiers are going to have the same motivation to fight when, say, you compare them to continental European soldiers, or especially early last century soldiers that had very grandiose opinions of their nations and weren't even entirely paid that badly? Like, it's just it doesn't match human nature. It doesn't match human nature. There's issues with capitalism. This is fucking closing statements.
Yeah.
Capitalism has issues. There's no denying that. But with regulation, with the combining of socialist and, in a lesser extent, this is by time period, I don't know what else to call it, feudalistic ideals, The idea of you do simply need an aristocratic class of some kind to function in a society of this scale. You do. You can't get around that. You can create a system that works great. You can create a Costco for all the world, if you will.
But that's not a solution.
Those
What?
are closing statements.
The fuck? Just never mind. There's issues with capitalism, but you can fix those issues. In fact, many countries, such as in Scandinavia and the lowlands, and even in Iberia, have fixed most of these problems and even brought new things that no one thought of before that were even better than either of the systems originally came up with. But one of them goes against human nature, 15 to 14,000 years of our history, and the very basis of human psychology, of motivation, of understanding. The other is what we've been using proto-forms of for well over 150,000 years, and a more direct version of for tens of thousands of years, and can be changed to fit any needs we need them to. That's all.
Alrighty, and now Polonium and water. Do you guys want to do separate, or do y'all just kind of want to do closing?
I think I'll represent the both of us
Okay.
from this point. So I think that personally, I think communism and socialism have many more inherent flaws. I don't think they're executed correctly. Like Mythic said, I think that it goes against a lot of human nature and what we stand for, and it doesn't really work for psychology. In the end, communism just seems to lead to extreme ends and make itself go to extreme ends when things fail. People are like, we need more and more and more communism, which is, a problem of ideologies, but it's especially dangerous in this ideology because it seems to, promote mob rule and not really necessarily properly justified empirical means of organizational structures. Capitalism seems to be able to innovate and adapt and be flexible towards the times, even though it at times can fail or not be perfect. We have many success stories of capitalism. Let's look at Singapore, which has government regulation. We can look at Japan, we can look at South Korea, we can look at America in some places, not all places, and Canada, for example. We have a lot of private companies that drive influence and helped us build our public transport, especially in the city of Vancouver specifically. There's a lot of areas of the city that were built up because private entities wanted to come in, and these places all have the highest indexes of living in the world, and they seem to have a much better ability to change with their population and adapt with the times, whereas communism still seems to be stuck in the 1920s and the older periods and the theories of social ideas, which have been disproven. So that's my main issue. That's my main discontention, my main contention with these ideas, and that's my opinion.
And just to add to that really quick, I want to throw a few punches here at the end too, all right? I think the biggest thing that we can take away from this is that, at least from the very least, the least contentious thing I'll say is that Marxist-Leninism doesn't work. But largely, I think that the system of socialism is just naive in general. And I think it's pretty telling when you look at the results of it, because I think the thing that capitalism does best is it takes people's inherent greed and our inherent want for our inherent desires, whether that be for the good or the bad, and it regulates them essentially with this idea of money and being regulated by, of course, the state and the people and businesses all checking each other, and there's always this tension here. Like it's like a trampoline. A trampoline doesn't work unless there's tension there. There's always got to be something that's acting upon other force to make sure that everything is working correctly, and there's always this I would say this pressure to not exploit your workers or to always not do something that we would deem immoral. That would be my only addition to that. Long live the United States.
I really hope you enjoyed that debate, and if you did, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe. If you would like to participate in a debate night as well, come join the server. Come be a part of the community. Link down in the description. But otherwise, that is all I have for you. Goodbye.